The sand beneath your feet is still warm, even though the sun has been gone for hours. You are standing at the edge of a stone chamber carved into the desert rock, and the smell hits you before your eyes adjust to the darkness. It is not what you expected. It is not incense. It is not cedar oil or sacred herbs. It is something older, something rawer, something that clings to the inside of your nose and refuses to leave. This is the mummification process, and nothing in any museum exhibit, any school textbook, any Hollywood film has ever come close to showing you what it actually looked, smelled, and felt like from the inside. The golden masks and the glass cases have done their job too well. They made you forget that before any of that beauty, there was a body, a rotting one. For thousands of years, ancient Egyptians believed that preserving the physical form was the only way to guarantee eternal life. The soul needed a home to return to. If the body dissolved, the afterlife was forfeit. That belief created an industry unlike anything the ancient world had ever seen, a profession built around slowing down death, interrupting decay, and transforming human flesh into something that could last eternity. But the people who actually did this work were not priests draped in white linen, standing in pristine temples. They were embalmers who spent their days elbow deep in the opened cavities of the recently dead, and the reality of what that required would make most modern people physically ill before the first hour was over. The process began almost immediately after death, because in Egypt's desert heat, the body does not wait. Within hours, decomposition announces itself. The skin begins to shift in color. The abdomen bloats with gases produced by bacteria already present in the gut. Fluids begin to move in directions they were never supposed to move. The embalmer's first job was to work against that clock, and he had to do it fast. The body was transported to a tent structure called the Ibu, the place of purification, set up near the Nile so that water was accessible. But the washing that happened there was not gentle or ceremonial in practice. It was functional, urgent, and deeply unpleasant, because whatever state the body arrived in, that was what the embalmer received. The first major procedure was the removal of the brain, and this is where the mummification process departs from everything your imagination prepared you for. The ancient Egyptians did not value the brain. They believed thought and emotion originated in the heart. The brain, as far as they were concerned, was a useless filler. So they removed it, but not through the skull. They inserted a long metal hook through the nostril, drove it upward through the ethmoid bone at the back of the nasal cavity, and then stirred, repeatedly. The goal was to liquefy the brain tissue enough that it could drain out through the nose. Sometimes they tilted the head to one side to help gravity do its part. Sometimes they used small spoons to scoop out what the hook could not reach. What remained after that process, what dripped from the nostrils of a person who had been alive perhaps 1 or 2 days earlier, was discarded. The organ that held every memory, every word, every dream that person ever had, was considered refuse. Then came the incision, and this is the part that no school lesson ever really explains. A deep cut was made on the left side of the abdomen using a flint blade, not iron, not bronze, but flint, because of ritual tradition. The person who made the cut was called the Ripper, and once he made the incision, he was symbolically chased away from the body, sometimes pelted with stones, because his act of cutting open a human being was considered a necessary violation, a ritual offense against the body, even while it was required for preservation. Someone else then stepped forward to remove the organs through that opening, and the organs that came out were the lungs, the liver, the stomach, and the intestines. Each one was washed, treated with natron, wrapped in linen, and placed in its own canopic jar. The heart, believed to be the seat of the person's entire identity and the organ that would be weighed against a feather in the afterlife, was left inside the chest. Everything else was removed. The body cavity was then washed out with wine and rinsed with spiced resins, not because this smelled pleasant, but because it was necessary to clean a space that had just been emptied of its contents. Now imagine the smell of all of this. You are used to a world where bodies are handled in refrigerated rooms, where medical professionals wear gloves and masks and have access to chemical disinfectants. In ancient Egypt, the embalming tent was open to the air, often near standing water, in temperatures that regularly exceeded 35 degrees Celsius. The body fluids, the stomach contents, the intestinal material, everything that came out of the abdominal cavity had to go somewhere. The embalmers worked in conditions that would be considered a biological hazard by any modern standard. Yet this was a profession passed from father to son, refined over generations, treated with a mixture of respect and revulsion that ancient sources themselves document. After the organs were removed, the body was packed, both inside and outside, with natron. Natron is a naturally occurring salt compound found in dry lake beds throughout Egypt, and its primary function was dehydration. It pulled moisture out of the tissue the way salt pulls water out of meat. The body was completely covered in natron and left for approximately 40 days. 40 days in which nothing happened except slow, complete desiccation. The skin darkened and tightened. The features shrank. The fingernails sometimes fell loose. The body that emerged from those 40 days looked almost nothing like the person who had died. It was rigid, darkened, leathery, and dramatically lighter than it had been, because most of what made a human body soft and recognizable is water, and the water was gone. What came next was the wrapping. And this is the part that photographs well, the part that ends up on museum posters and documentary thumbnails. But the wrapping was not the gentle, reverent ritual it appears to be in paintings. It was hours of meticulous, physically demanding labor. Hundreds of meters of linen strips were required for a single body. The linen was often reused from household textiles, from old clothing, from worn sheets, from whatever was available. Each finger was wrapped individually, each toe. The arms were wrapped separately before being bound to the body. Resins were applied between layers to help bind the bandages and to add another barrier against moisture and insects. Amulets were placed at specific points on the body according to ritual requirements, pressed against the skin beneath the linen, tucked between layers, positioned according to texts that detailed exactly where each protective charm needed to rest. The entire process, from the first incision to the final outer wrapping, took 70 days. 70 days of daily labor performed on a single corpse. For wealthy individuals, the quality of materials was extraordinary. The finest white linen, the most potent resins, juniper oil, frankincense, myrrh, cedar oil imported from Lebanon. Each layer added cost and added preservation. But for ordinary Egyptians, mummification existed on a sliding scale. Those who could not afford the full process received a simpler treatment. Cedar oil was injected into the body through the rectum and the opening sealed. After several days, the seal was removed and the liquefied internal organs drained out. No surgical incision, no canopic jars, just cedar oil introduced through the most undignified possible route, left to dissolve what it could, and then extracted. This was considered an acceptable alternative. And those even further down the economic scale received little more than a natron bath and a linen shroud before burial in the dry desert sand, which, ironically, often preserved them better than the more elaborate procedures because the sand itself acted as a natural desiccant. The people performing this work occupied a strange social position. They were essential, respected in function, but ritually impure in status. They lived at the edges of towns near the necropolis, near the dead. They did not share meals easily with others. Their work contaminated them in the eyes of social convention, even as it was considered sacred service to the gods. The head embalmer wore a jackal mask during certain rituals. embodying Anubis, the god of embalming, transforming himself temporarily into something between human and divine to perform an act that no purely human hand should technically perform. The theology and the biology met in that mask in a way that captures everything strange and brutal about this practice. It was holy, it was necessary, it was disgusting, and it was unavoidable. The bodies of animals were mummified too, on an industrial scale that modern archaeology has only recently begun to fully understand. Millions of cats, ibises, crocodiles, baboons, dogs, and falcons were mummified as offerings to the gods. Entire temple complexes had dedicated animal mummification operations running continuously. Pilgrim worshippers would purchase a mummified animal, present it at the temple as a votive offering, and believe they had secured divine favor. Recent scientific analysis of these animal mummies has revealed something uncomfortable. A significant number of them contain no animal at all, or contain only partial remains, feathers instead of a whole bird, a few bones instead of a complete cat. The industry of animal mummification became so large that demand outpaced supply, and some producers filled the linen bundles with whatever was available to maintain the appearance of a complete offering. The sacred marketplace had its own economy of deception, but it is the human mummies that keep pulling researchers back, because the information locked inside those preserved bodies is extraordinary. Skeletal analysis and imaging technology have revealed that the people of ancient Egypt suffered from arterial disease, dental abscesses so severe they caused bone erosion, parasitic infections that damaged organs over decades, spinal compression from years of carrying heavy stone, and eye diseases caused by blowing sand. They had cancers, they had broken bones that healed improperly, they had intestinal worms so large that their physical presence would have caused chronic pain and malnutrition. The same bodies that were wrapped in gold-threaded linen and placed in painted coffins that showed idealized, youthful, eternal versions of their occupants were, underneath all of that, records of lives defined by physical suffering. The greatest irony of the mummification process is what it actually preserved. The Egyptians believed they were preserving the body for the soul. What they actually preserved was evidence. Evidence of disease, of diet, of labor, of violence, of parasites, of environmental damage, of a life lived in a body that was continuously under assault from the world around it. Every mummy that has ever been unwrapped and studied tells the same story in different ways. This person was human, this person suffered, and this person's world was far harder, far more painful, and far more precarious than any golden artifact has ever been allowed to suggest. You can think about that the next time you take a painkiller for a headache, the next time you drink clean water without thinking, the next time you sleep on a mattress in a sealed room without sand in your food, without worms in your gut, without a body that will begin to visibly decay within hours of your last breath if no one intervenes. The elaborate ritual of mummification existed precisely because the ancient Egyptians understood, at the most visceral possible level, how fragile and temporary the human body really is. They built an entire theology around the fear of that fragility. And the 70-day process they invented to defeat it was, in practice, one of the most physically confronting procedures any human civilization has ever normalized. The beautiful masks were always a lie. The real story was in the salt. If there is another civilization, another ritual, another historical world whose hidden reality you want to see stripped of its mythology and shown exactly as it was, leave it in the comments below.